You guys doing okay?
I hear him hollering.
You do?
Yeah, I heard him banging and hollering.
You found a bone? Holy shit. Okay, I'm calling him now. Yeah, try not to touch anything.
You hear him?
Yeah, they found a bone in here. "40 years ago, in 1983, just outside of Dallas, Texas, in a rural area, there was a young, beautiful 2-year-old girl named Amber Crum. Amber's biological parents, they had split up, and Amber was living with her mother, Stephanie, and her boyfriend, who we will call James. The day after Christmas, the boyfriend, James, claims that he took Amber to a nearby store and said that he had left the 2-year-old girl in the truck while he went inside the store for a few minutes. When James came back out, she was supposedly gone, but James wouldn't call 911 until he got back to the house. James told law enforcement that he had left the truck unlocked and that someone must have taken Amber while he was inside shopping. They would ask him to describe the events and where he parked, but after further investigation, a witness came forward claiming they never saw Amber and that James had lied about where he had actually parked. It is not a big store, nor does it have a big parking lot, so how could she have been taken so quick unless this event had never happened? Law enforcement would go and talk with the mother, Stephanie. Stephanie would give a completely different statement. Going back to Christmas evening, the mother, Stephanie, recalls that the boyfriend, James, had tried giving Amber a bath and believes that there was some kind of foul play involved and something terrible happened that night. Stephanie recalls later that night she had walked into Amber's bedroom during Christmas evening to check on Amber and said that Amber was lying in the bed facing away. When she looked into Amber's eyes, they were open, but she wasn't blinking. It's believed Amber's life was taken, sadly, on Christmas. No charges would be brought to the boyfriend or the mother, and sadly Amber's case would grow cold, and her father, Larry, would try everything to get local law enforcement to examine new leads, but nothing was done, and sadly 40 years would go by. After a lot of investigating by her own father, Larry Crum, and others, there has been some new leads discovered, and we, the mob crew, Steve from True Crime Web, Carolyn from Unearth Secrets, and her sister Christina, we're all heading to help bring closure to this case. Tips have led us to a house that was formerly owned by the boyfriend James. We believe that there is a great possibility that Amber could have been buried in her own backyard the day after Christmas. Back in the year 1983, there was one of the worst winter storms that hit Texas, and the temperatures would hit the high negatives, meaning it would be hard to travel or bury a body during this time, as the ground would have been nearly impossible to dig. Also, the mother had made another statement that she believed she had seen her boyfriend digging in the backyard. So the team and Larry, we all came from different states to meet up in Terrell, Texas on April 30th to establish a game plan. That next day, day 1, we went to that house where we believe Larry's daughter could have been buried. On day 1, after learning about a special item being found in a certain part of the backyard, the team decided it would be best to do an ERI scan, which stands for electrical resistivity imaging, near certain spots that felt like there would be abnormalities in the ground. A depression in the ground would be considered a spot of interest, and we definitely found a couple.
Is that exactly like the rest of the yard?
That's like that over there.
Up to me.
Hard for you.
Do you?
That first foot and then it just dropped.
Can you do a couple more posts?
Then go through that little
Clay.
compact
Yeah,
like
I
that,
guarantee it's that
and
clay.
then it just drops there.
Right.
Okay.
There's probably no telling what's on it.
Right there is extremely hard, but right here it just dropped there.
Okay.
And I'll go over that side.
So yeah, because between
Yeah, it just drops there. I'm only good for guerrilla activities at disturbed surface.
Yeah. It's crazy.
The current homeowners said that there was a natural duck pond that had developed in a certain spot in the backyard. This is interesting because this could mean this is the cause of ground being disturbed, like being dug up and filled back in, and it would eventually sink down, so we decided to focus on this area. We began to lay out the lines and rods to start running our test. This process is very interesting. Basically, metal rods are placed into the ground and then you run electric current through the ground between the two rods, and using special software you can produce 2D images and look for any disturbances. At the end of day 1, after running multiple lines, it was time to go back to the hotel and look at the images. Day 2. So early that morning on day 2, our geophysicist Carolyn discovered that there were disturbances in that area that were not natural and could be the spot where something like remains could have been buried. So we went back out to the house to evaluate what our next options were. Around this time, we did get some bad news. Larry learned that a certain local law enforcement agency had lost all their files on his daughter's case. This was a huge blow. These files could have contained valuable info and leads to help this case. So Steve went out to meet up with an old PI who worked on this case for many decades to recover what files he had on this case and make copies and try and salvage this tremendous loss. As we approached midday of day 2, we realized that there was a good chance something could be in this backyard, and we decided to make arrangements for GPR, which is ground penetrating radar, to be ran over the same area where we had discovered the anomalies, as well as to bring in some cadaver dogs. So after doing some yard work, we packed up and headed home for the day. Then day 3 happened, and this is when something massive would be discovered and flip everything on its head. We had also planned to scan the ground under the house. This was actually going to be our primary target until learning about an item found in the backyard, which had us switch up what we were going to scan first. While Larry and I had checked under the house on that first day to get an idea of what kind of space we had under there, we had only checked certain areas under the house, which is full of random piles of insulation, bugs, debris, and just enough space to crawl on your belly. If you were afraid of claustrophobia, this was not the place to crawl into.
Well, yeah.
If you hear me saying, I'm doing this for Amber, it means that I'm panicking. That's my panic sentence.
So if I hear screams underneath there, I need to come running.
Try not to scream because that makes things worse for me.
Oh, yeah.
So my panic sentence is, I'm doing this for Amber.
What's the code word for get me the hell out?
Get me the hell out.
Amber.
So we decided to come up with a game plan. After Carolyn had suited up, Larry and her went to start measuring under the entire house to get an idea of how many ERI lines we would have to run. I would stay outside the hole and help feed the line while Larry and Carolyn would start measuring. I would watch as the line would slowly move inch by inch until it stopped moving, and then not after seeing the tape line move for quite a while, it got real eerie all of a sudden. I began to call their names with no response. There was construction going on next door and the sound does not travel very well under the house. At the same time, while I was worrying about Larry and Carolyn, the home owner came out, said she had heard pounding coming from under the house.
You guys doing okay?
I hear him hollering.
You do?
Yeah, I heard him banging and hollering.
You found a bone? Holy shit. Okay, I'm calling him now. Yeah, try not to touch anything.
You hear him?
Yeah, they found a bone in here.
This is when we heard that they had found something. They had found bones. I immediately called Steve, who was gone at the time. He told me to tell Larry and Carolyn to document and get out and not to touch anything. This is when I had to suit up and begin to make my way under the house, since neither Larry or Carolyn had access to a camera or their phones. So as I made my way to the halfway point under the house, I met up with Carolyn, and this is when she told me what they had discovered.
There's a purple piece of film.
Oh.
We saw this depression with a mound inside.
Okay.
I'm turning to the left. I have a thing that looks like in that mound that was in that depression. I started using his knife just to see if what was its deal. And I have in my hand something that we couldn't tell if it was a hair or not, a blonde hair or not. And then a piece of the lime, if you want.
What they had discovered: small bones, a hole under the house, limestones that could have been used to dissolve a body, and a pile of charcoal. Charcoal can be used to absorb odors. Things got very surreal at this moment as I'm listening to Carolyn describe what they found. So I handed my phone over to Carolyn, and she proceeded to crawl back towards the site of some of the bones and the hole. And in that moment, Larry and Carolyn both had discovered more bones. Larry and Carolyn would continue to progress back towards the entrance while taking photos of the different bones. Eventually, Carolyn would emerge out first, covered head to toe in dirt and cut up from the insulation. Then Larry would emerge as well, and that's when we learned about everything they had found under the home. Tiny bones, one that looked like a little finger bone, and another bone that could have been a rib bone. They also discovered a hole, and in that hole is an impression, like something was buried in that hole. This was all so very surreal.
And there was a big depression, with a big hump in the middle of the depression.
Yeah.
I said, what the hell is that?
You didn't see it when you were out there the first time?
No.
No.
But with two of us, we got more light, I could see.
And also a very tough situation for Larry, not knowing what we had just discovered. Was it the remains of his daughter or something else? Steve had just arrived and discussed that the next step to do is to call law enforcement. After calling in what we had discovered, it was now a waiting game. Larry would be sent back to the hotel where he would be left with only his thoughts, and this would be the worst time for any father going through a situation like this, not knowing what we had just discovered. We would also soon learn that Dallas 911 call center had been hacked and the whole system was down, and all local law enforcement was experiencing chaos. We didn't know it yet, but we were in for a long night.
On emergency calls, the city of Dallas is still struggling after what officials are calling a ransomware attack. And now, another county is on alert. Tiffany Liu looks at where all of this stands this midday.
Been fixed yet. We have reached more than 48 hours since the city of Dallas was hacked, and while the city says Dallas police and fire rescue services are unaffected, we are being told something different. Police Chief Eddie Garcia says DPD is significantly impacted by the outage. 911 dispatchers, for example, are working with pen, paper, and radios.
We would end up waiting several hours until it hit about 9 p.m. Just as it got dark, 2 patrol cars showed up and started inquiring about the situation. They would look at the pictures we took and decided to call the medical examiner. And eventually more patrol cars showed up, and we now had 5 different squad cars, including detectives and a medical examiner. At this time, with all the patrol cars here and all the reports being taken, it was very nerve-wracking, not knowing what we had discovered. Had we solved the 40-year-old cold case, or was this something else?
We have at least a squad car that stays out here just to make sure nothing, the evidence doesn't get touched or anything like that. And maybe they'll come out in the morning.
It's been there for 40 years. It's not going on.
Oh yeah,
it would be really.
Yep.
All right.
Oh yeah, no worries. Thank y'all for all y'all did for us.
Since the bones were located way back towards the front of the house, they would have Carolyn escort the medical examiner back under the house and collect some of the bones. They would ask Steve, Christina, and I to go down to the local station to get interviewed, which after being up for nearly 24 hours, everything felt like a dream at this point. At the same time as we were getting interviewed, Carolyn and law enforcement went to recover some of the bones. Eventually, we were all at the station, including Carolyn, who also had to get interviewed.
So real quick, what are we doing here?
We're being interviewed.
All right. And what is this? The Chilnavitsky Children.
McDonald. No, it's the Dallas Children's Advocacy Center.
Okay.
The DCAC.
And shortly after, they said they were going to expedite the process of testing the bones and would have an answer for us within 24 hours. We got back to the hotel around 6:30 a.m. and we were tired. Larry had been waiting and had been informed of the situation, and this would be the most difficult time for Larry. We would soon learn what we had found shortly 6 hours later on day 4.